Firing up your smartwatch these days can be an overwhelming experience as you're presented with so many metrics, and of course they're all useful, but which ones are really going to help you run faster? Okay, so we have picked 5 metrics that we believe will really help you to run faster. And obviously everyone has their own preferences and maybe slight tweaks, but these are our go-to here at GTN. But before I share those with you, I'm just gonna ask you a little favor. If you guys haven't yet subscribed, well, click on the globe and you'll get all of our videos. It is free. And if you're enjoying this video, give us a like. A surprise that pace comes top of the list. I mean, you're hardly going to get far with your running if you don't know whether you're running faster or slower. And you've got options here. You can go with minutes per mile, minutes per kilometre. You could do miles per hour, kilometres per hour. I mean, it's really up to you. We're not going to judge you. Although it is minutes per kilometre. And I personally have it displayed really large on my watch. It's probably the most prominent thing because when I'm working hard, I can still at a glance work out what pace I'm running at. And you can be quite accurate with pace too. You can calculate your zones so you know roughly where you should be running for which sessions, and that's how Mark, James and I do most of our quality runs. But obviously you want to be doing that on the flat so you can target your pace accurately. And you'll find the more you run to pace, the more you'll be able to actually get a feel and know pretty much than just checking your watch to check that you are on that right target. Now, if you're going anywhere that isn't flat, it's obviously harder to stick to pace, but you might notice when you look at your metrics afterwards, something called GAP, gradient adjusted pace, and that's really useful just to get an idea if you were kind of maintaining a similar pace irrelevant of the hills, as it takes into the hills into account. So if you're running uphill, obviously you wouldn't need to be running as fast, and running downhill you'd be averagely going faster, and it gives you an overall average for your run. And then we have cadence or stride frequency, which is basically the number of times a runner takes a step in a minute, and it's displayed as SPM. Sometimes on some apps you might see it as revolutions per minute, and that's basically half that number as it's just measuring one side. Now, the gold standard is thought of as 180 strides per minute. That's what's expected to be the most efficient running, so you get the most out of the effort that you're putting in. But realistically, many of us are going to struggle to hit that, so it's just a bit of a target, but it's worth keeping an eye on what your SPM is, especially if, say, you're doing a longer run or a hard session, as when you do get tired, that number can start to drop. Heart rate is a measure of our body's response to the effort we're putting in, and it's measured as beats per minute or BPM. For the most accurate measurements, you can use a chest heart rate monitor, but you've also got other options now, such as a smart sensor in your watch. You can use wristbands or even rings. Now, heart rate, just like pace, can be used to calculate our zones, and it's a really good marker to gauge where you're at with your fitness. Because, for example, if you're running at the same pace, but you see your heart rate starting to drop or being a little bit lower, then that's a good indicator that your fitness is improving. And it can be really useful when pace is obsolete, for example, running up a hill. It's also, if you keep a close eye on it, you might be able to notice an indication of maybe illness or fatigue. It does, however, have a few limitations. For example, the lag, so your heart rate will take a while to reflect the change in pace. So say if you're doing short, sharp efforts, then a heart rate would be less useful, and it might not, if you're running up a hill, for example, give you the increase in heart rate until you're well into that effort and maybe you've gone into the red. But it's all about learning to use that metric, and it certainly plays a strong place in your training. And then there's your distance or your mileage. I mean, I think it's a given that most of us want to see how far we've run per run, but it's also really useful for looking at your overall total volume or your total mileage per week and keeping a good track on this. And obviously, in order to get fitter, we need to overload our bodies, and that can be done through training harder and doing more intensity workouts, but it can also be done through increasing that overall load. And having this metric on your watch, but also on your app when you're looking afterwards, gives you a good idea to make sure that you're sticking to the track. And then you can use this data to do more analysis, say on apps like Training Peaks, where you can measure fitness versus form. So it'll take in your weekly mileage and the intensity of that and give a prediction of how fit you're getting, but also the fatigue levels and showing your overall form, which is a really good way to make sure that you don't end up overtraining. This next metric you can't actually record whilst you're running. We are talking about sleep, and there are numerous ways in which you can get this data. Most smartwatches will automatically record your sleep, and some will even give you a breakdown of the quality of that sleep, giving you REM versus light sleep versus deep sleep. Now you might be questioning, well, if it's not actually whilst you're running, why are we worrying about this metric? But obviously, in order to run faster, you need to make sure you're having the adequate amount of rest and recovery, and it's during sleep that your body does a huge amount of repair, so you need to make sure you're getting quality sleep. And if you do track it, you'll start to see patterns in your sleep, and it could indicate areas of fatigue, or if you're getting another illness or something like that. So knowing what your normal is really useful. And if you have seen that you've had a really poor night's sleep, we've had poor quality sleep, then you might want to just adapt that training that day to make sure that you're not overtraining or pushing your body when it's not quite ready. There are, of course, so many more metrics, and we are by no means saying that ours are right and yours are wrong. These are just the ones that we find useful and we use day in, day out. But we'd obviously love to hear which metrics you find useful and which ones you use. Do let us know in the comments section below, and hopefully you've enjoyed it. You know how to support us. Hit the like button.